Let's go ahead and look at your questions now. 636-686-0140. You can text them in. We've got one here already. I've been struggling with several sins over the past few years. I've asked God for help multiple times, but my situation hasn't changed. Where has God been all this time? What should my next step be? As I read this, first of all, I can relate with this. I think everyone in the room can, if we're honest. But as I read this, I hear Paul in 2 Corinthians. We just looked at that. In this place where he's given some sort of, he's wrestling with something and he's begging God to take it away, and God doesn't take it away. And maybe in our minds we wonder, God, why wouldn't you just take that away? And in my life, I think part of the reason God doesn't do that is because then I might get caught up in this idea. It might reaffirm a bad idea that in order to be lovable, in order to be useful, I've got to be perfect. So God's job is to, rid me of all of my imperfections, remove them from my life, so then later on, after my act has been cleaned up, I can be useful. And what Paul says in 2 Corinthians is that in this place of weakness, in this place of struggle, God is trying to teach you something else. He's trying to teach you that his grace is sufficient. And if I could summarize the journey of what it means to be a Christian after that moment that you come to know Jesus, you're baptized into him, you're given identity in him. If I could summarize the journey of what it means to live as a Christian, what we're doing for the rest of that journey, I think it's that. We're learning that his grace is sufficient. And it's so foreign to us, it's so crazy to us that could be true, that because we just expect God should be cleaning us up and fixing all of this, and yet he's telling us that there's something else, that his goodness, his mercy, his kindness, his real-time presence, his walking with us through these struggles, there's something better about that than just waving a magic wand and making it go away. And I know the narrative that we like to believe or we like to talk about in church is all about the deliverance. It's all about the healing. It's all about being made better in an instant. And that's a great thing. And sometimes God chooses to do that. In my life, it's been this. It's be crying out for God, my situation not changing, but God beginning to teach me what it means to rest in his grace. And that his power is perfected not in my strength, not when I have my act together, that his power in me is perfected in my weakness. So he's there, and he's trying to teach you that his grace is sufficient. And maybe there's some stuff here where I don't know if you've sought help for this, because there are ways that we can invite other people into our struggles, and we can confess that, and we can ask for help from other people, and that makes the struggles a little less powerful, but even then they might not completely go away. So maybe a next step for you is to invite other people into that. And if you haven't done that, absolutely do that. But if you have done that and you're still struggling, then maybe it's reading the words of Paul and really asking God to teach you what it means that his grace is sufficient. And I'm still studying that lesson, but I think that's the lesson I'm supposed to be studying, and so I'm going to study it until I get it. Does God allow us to fall short, to test us and teach us to grow as people? When we ask questions like this, and again, these are questions I've wondered about too. I think one of the things we have to be careful about, and it's a delicate dance, and it's hard for me sometimes in my mind to get it right. This stuff about like, does God allow, or does, even a stronger way of saying it would be, does God cause us to fall short? So let me just say this, that when we fall short, we're responsible for that. The only mature response to my fallenness is, that's on me. And I could try to blame my parents or my upbringing or society or anything else that's happened to me. But the mature response, the right response to my fallenness is that's on me. And there may be a lot of reasons why I struggle to do what I'm supposed to do, and there may be good reasons, and the deck may be stacked against me, but for every time that, I give you my list of, well, this is why I can't do it, or this is why I can't measure up, someone else can give me that same list, or their list can be worse, and they can be doing better than I can, because ultimately it does come down to some personal responsibility in this. And so as we wrestle with this issue, and I don't know that this is what you're saying, but I know in the games I play in my own mind as I wrestle through this stuff, there are a lot of times where I want to deny responsibility for my fallenness because of any number of things. I want to put it somewhere else. But again, the mature, the responsible answer is always, I'm responsible for my own fallenness. No one else is responsible for that. Now, having said that, and I kind of just talked about this in the last question, I believe, and I believe the scriptures teach, that part of the reason God doesn't come in today and remove my fallenness or heal my brokenness or give me victory over my struggles, I believe that's an intentional decision, and Paul again says that in 2 Corinthians. And I believe he's doing something in it. Now, is he testing us? Is he teaching us? It depends how you view testing. Is it just like some kind of cruel thing? Because some of the things I struggle with, if this is just a test of God, that makes him pretty cruel, right? There's some things you just don't test people with if you're a kind and loving person, let alone a kind and loving God. And so I think we have to be careful with that. But this idea of teaching us, informing us, of trying to help us learn how to rely on his goodness, of trying to help us learn how to have a deeper relationship with him. Yeah, I believe absolutely the reason God lets us linger in our fallenness, and again, that's my fault. My fallenness is my fault. But the reason God lets me hang there rather than just erasing it is because he's trying to draw me in to deeper reliance, deeper trust. He's trying to grow me, especially in my relationship with him. I have a relative that I call a thorn in my side. This relative is a horrendous person to deal with. I find myself trying to avoid this person and situation, yet I feel terrible about it. What should I do? Maybe you could call a hitman? I don't know. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. Sometimes you find yourself there though, right? You're like, golly. And people are one of the greatest blessings in life. Relationships can be one of the greatest blessings. God uses them over and over again. I'm a believer of that. Our church believes that. That's why we do this together. It's a biblical teaching. People can also be the biggest thorn in our side. I see Steve Hauer sitting there, and as pastors, we often talk about how the work is all about people, and that's the joy of it, but that's also the pain. This would be easy work if it weren't for people. We say, and that's the irony of it. So you're in good company. I think that's what we all feel. I think in all of that, there are limits that we have in our relationships, and again, I think it's important for us to understand our limits, to have boundaries. There's some great stuff written about boundaries, and maybe that's behind all of this. Maybe you're a person who doesn't know how to have good boundaries, or you're not sure what are healthy boundaries or how to enforce healthy boundaries. Because we all deal with people who are difficult, and we're called to love them and to be patient with them and endure with them. I find in my life, when this becomes such a painful thing, that it's just toxic, it's negative, often it's not the other person's fault, it's my fault for not having clear boundaries for that relationship, allowing this person to do too much against me, allowing myself to be in a situation that's not healthy for me. And so I would suggest that you look into some good boundaries here while you still try to be patient and endure and be gracious toward that person. So you have the mind and the heart of Jesus, and you've asked God to give you that, to persist with them, but you also create some boundaries in your life so that this person's, whatever makes them horrendous, you don't have to let their evil or their difficulty take over your life. There are some boundaries there. So there's a guy, Henry Cloud, who wrote some books on boundaries. Look up boundaries on Amazon. There are a million books about boundaries, but that's some good stuff for you. What do you do when your own parents reject you, even though you've done nothing wrong? This is a lot like the other question. I don't know the circumstances of this. These questions out of context, it makes it really hard for me. Maybe your parents are just really broken people and they need grace and mercy. Maybe there is something you've done wrong, although maybe not. I would just say make sure you search your heart on this thing, because it is fully possible that you've really done nothing wrong against them. I mean, sure, we're all fallen, we're all broken. Maybe it is possible that you've done nothing wrong, but you should always examine yourself first to make sure that's true, that you've looked at yourself and you've asked for forgiveness for whatever you need to. And yeah, I've experienced relationships where I've done that, and I'm like, I've not been flawless here. I'll admit that, I'll confess that, I ask for your forgiveness, and the other person is hard-hearted. And Jesus talks about that there are relationships where the other person is just too hard of heart and the relationship can't continue. In fact, that's the only reason, the only logical reason Jesus gives for divorce in the New Testament. He says divorce, Moses said like you can get divorced, but the only reason that you can do that, the only reason he allows someone to do that is because sometimes your heart is so hard, someone's heart is so hard that they refuse to forgive, they refuse to accept, and that can become a pretty dangerous thing. And when someone's heart is hard, there's nothing in the world you can do to change it. So I think if you've examined yourself and you're looking at your parents and their rejection of you is just a matter of hardness of heart, I think you try to move on. And I know that's really painful. For me, when I have to move on and distance myself from these relationships, it's not an angry thing. It's not I'm always leaving the door open, but I'm not gonna break myself against the hardness of someone else's heart. But I will provide space, and I try my best to provide space for that person to save face, so that if God should do the work of softening their heart or something else should soften them, they feel like they can come back. So there's this delicate dance of moving on from that. I know it's painful when it's your parents, but also leaving the door open where they can, in a way, in a saving face kind of way, admit they're wrong and be reconciled to you. That's tough. Jesus said in Matthew 5:48. I love when you quote Bible verses at me. Be perfect, even as my Father in heaven is perfect. How can I do this? Yeah, great question. If you read Matthew chapter 5, 6, and even some of 7, you get Jesus talking about the law and then increasing the standards, making the stakes even higher. And so much of his point is that you can't do this. You can't do this. Now, you may be asking, so why would Jesus tell me to do this if you can't do this? What's the point of that? It's getting to this place of realizing that you can't do this. See, we as religious people, I'll just use that term for a minute, we as religious people, because we come in a lot of forms, but religious people are all the same in this way, that we start to deceive ourselves into thinking we're better than we are. And we start to live as if our, not perfection, but our goodness is enough to make us lovable to God, make us deserving of a good life. We start to put a lot of faith, a lot of hope, a lot of trust in our goodness. We start to look down on other people for not being as good as us. It gets into this whole really ugly thing that we've all experienced, but we also all do. And so part of Jesus, especially in these parts of Matthew, is breaking this down in us. For people who think they can save themselves by their goodness, or people who think that your goodness entitles you to God's love or the favor of people or a good life, he just keeps bringing the stakes higher and higher until he finally gets here and goes, okay, well then you just gotta be perfect. Like God in heaven is perfect. And his audience, just like you, whoever asked this question, is sitting there going, who can do that? And he goes, exactly, you can't do that, because it's not about your perfection. It's not about your perfection. I know God created the world to be perfect, for us to live in perfection, but perfection wasn't the point in and of itself. God created the world in perfection because to live in perfection is a great blessing. To live in a perfect world with no brokenness, that's a great blessing. God created the world the way he did because he's a loving God who wanted to favor us and give us more than we could possibly deserve. It wasn't so that we could perfectly be entitled to everything that we have, because we didn't earn that. God created it for us. Even if we were perfect, we still didn't deserve it. And so even in the Garden of Eden, there was this call for humility and gratitude and receiving the goodness of God in a very open-handed way, regardless of whether you're perfect or not. But we as religious people, we get this all wrong. And so Jesus calls us back to this way of living where, again, we say, I don't deserve any of this. I can't claim credit for any of this, and yet God is so good, he's so merciful, he's so generous, he's so kind. I love him and I want to serve him. It's the same thing. And so Jesus had to do a lot of work to break that down in the people of Israel, also in people like us sitting here today, so that we get back to this place. We get back to this place that Adam and Eve were in, that we're called to be in again, where we glory in the goodness and the kindness of God that is so far beyond what we deserve. Even if we were perfect, it would be far beyond what we deserve.